The courtroom had seen its share of arrogance, but on this day was about to witness something so shocking it would echo far beyond its wooden walls. The cameras were already rolling when a woman whose sense of entitlement filled the space before she even opened her mouth leaned forward with a sneer and delivered the words that would seal her fate. "You're just a useless grandma." The audacity landed like a slap in the face not just to Judge Judy herself, but to everyone in the room who understood exactly whose presence they were in. This wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of war in a place where arrogance had never won. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was thick, electric, suffocating. Audience members exchanged wide-eyed glances, silently confirming they had really heard what they thought they heard. The plaintiff sat frozen, unsure whether to laugh at the absurdity or shrink into her chair from secondhand embarrassment. Even the bailiff tilted his head slightly, as if bracing for impact. Because anyone who had spent more than 10 minutes in Judge Judy's courtroom knew exactly what was coming next. You don't insult Judith Sheindlin and expect to walk away unscathed. Not today. Not ever. What made the moment even more surreal was the confidence with which Karen, entitled defendant, delivered her words. She strutted into the courtroom as if it were her stage, as though the cameras were rolling for her personal victory show. In her mind, she was the star. In reality, she had already written the script for her own downfall. Calling Judge Judy a useless grandma wasn't just disrespect, it was ignorance. And ignorance in that courtroom was about to be punished in front of millions. Judge Judy's face remained still. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unblinking. But behind that silence, a storm was gathering strength. Everyone could feel it. It wasn't a question of if she would respond, but how devastating that response would be. That anticipation, the quiet before the thunder, was the moment that hooked audiences across America. Before diving into how Judge Judy unleashed the comeback that silenced not only Karen, but the entire room, viewers were urged to smash the like button, subscribe if they hadn't already, and comment one word below: respect. What followed was a masterclass in what happens when arrogance collides with authority. Karen wasn't just any ordinary defendant. From the moment she walked into the courtroom, she carried herself with the swagger of someone convinced the world revolved around her. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't humbled by the seriousness of the setting. Instead, she paraded down the aisle with a smug grin, her designer handbag swinging from her arm like a trophy. She hadn't come seeking justice. She had come to perform, and in her mind, she was the star of the show. Her reputation preceded her. Neighbors whispered about her constant arguments at grocery stores, her loud rants in parking lots, and her endless demands to speak to the manager whenever things didn't go her way. She had a habit of intimidating waitstaff, rolling her eyes at customer service employees, and acting as though her money entitled her to special treatment everywhere she went to those who knew her. This behavior was typical. To those who didn't, it was shocking. But in Judge Judy's courtroom, arrogance wasn't just shocking, it was suicidal. The irony of Karen's arrogance was that she believed her appearance alone could conceal her flaws. She dressed sharply, styled her hair perfectly, and even practiced her dismissive smirk in the mirror. Yet none of it could hide the truth. Her words exposed her. Her superiority complex was evident in every syllable. Dripping with disdain for anyone she considered beneath her hand in Karen's world, nearly everyone was. On the surface, her case seemed simple, a petty financial dispute blown wildly out of proportion. She claimed she was owed money for damage to a handbag she insisted was worth more than most people's rent. But the case was never really about the bag. It was about her ego. She craved recognition, validation, and above all, the opportunity to belittle someone in a public setting where she believed the cameras would capture her triumph. She thought this was her moment to shine. What Karen didn't realize was who she was dealing with: Judge Judy wasn't just another authority figure she could sneer at. She had handled thousands of cases, dismantled liars with surgical precision, and exposed manipulative personalities for decades. She didn't just see what Karen was doing, she saw through it. All the way down to the insecure foundation Karen had been hiding behind arrogance for years. What made Karen so dangerous to herself was her inability to recognize the battlefield she had stepped onto. In her mind, she was about to educate Judy to school a judge on how things really worked. She believed Judy's age made her outdated, irrelevant, and, as she would later say, useless. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. And Karen was about to learn that lesson the hard way. What she didn't understand was that Judy wasn't just preparing to rule on her case. She was preparing to teach her a lesson millions would never forget. From the very first question, Karen's contempt for the process was impossible to miss. When Judge Judy asked her to clarify the details of her claim, Karen didn't answer directly. Instead, she let out a loud sigh, rolled her eyes dramatically, and muttered just loudly enough for the microphones to catch, "This is ridiculous." The audience shifted in their seats. Some smirked at the sheer boldness of her attitude, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Everyone knew what was coming even if Karen didn't. Karen leaned back in her chair as though she owned the room, crossing her arms and wearing a look that screamed condescension. Each time Judge Judy spoke, Karen interrupted, cutting her off with remarks like, "Actually, if you knew anything about the law, and that's not how it works, Grandma." The insult was whispered at first, but the venom behind it was unmistakable. Every dismissive laugh, every exaggerated shrug, every sarcastic smirk only added fuel to the fire. She was lighting beneath herself. The plaintiff sitting on the other side could barely hide her disbelief. She had come prepared with documents and a calm demeanor, ready to present her case, but instead watched as Karen turned the hearing into her personal stage for mockery. The plaintiff didn't need to say much. Karen's arrogance was doing all the work for her. The cameras captured every moment, preserving it for the millions who would later watch in stunned silence. Judge Judy, however, remained calm. She had built her career on never reacting impulsively, on letting arrogance hang itself with its own rope. But the more Karen smirked, the more the courtroom felt like a coiled spring. Judy's silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. She let Karen laugh. She let Karen interrupt. She let Karen lean forward and call her outdated, irrelevant, and finally deliver the fatal words, "You're just a useless grandma in a robe." The instant the words left Karen's lips, the air shifted. The audience gasped audibly, as if someone had thrown a brick through a stained glass window. The plaintiff's jaw dropped, her pen clattering onto the desk. Even the bailiff, who had heard every insult imaginable, stiffened and fixed his eyes on Karen, almost as if bracing for impact. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Karen, oblivious to the severity of what she had just done, smiled smugly and adjusted her jacket as though she had won some invisible game. In her mind, she had scored the ultimate point. She believed that by undermining Judy's authority, she had shifted the power dynamic in her favor. She couldn't have been more wrong. What Karen didn't realize was that Judge Judy had been preparing her counterstrike since the very first disrespectful sigh. Every insult, every eye roll, every interruption had been carefully catalogued. Now the trap was set. Judy didn't need to shout. She didn't need to scold. What she was about to deliver wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a takedown so precise and so devastating it would strip Karen of her arrogance. Piece by piece. The silence after Karen's insults stretched longer than anyone expected. Seconds felt like minutes. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room until it was clear the storm was about to break. Karen had no idea she had just crossed the one line from which there was no return. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the cameras capturing every second. Judge Judy sat motionless, her eyes locked on Karen with a stare so piercing it felt as though it could cut through steel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her gavel. She didn't need to. The stillness itself was more powerful than any outburst, and within it, Judy was building her response. Karen, still oblivious to the shifting atmosphere, tapped her manicured nails on the desk, smirking at what she believed was a victorious insult. She thought she had reduced Judy to silence. To her, it was proof that she had won. But to everyone else in the room, it was painfully clear that Karen had just signed her own humiliation warrant. Then Judy leaned forward slowly, deliberately. Her voice came out low and precise, each word chosen with the care of a surgeon preparing for an incision. "Let's take a closer look at your case, shall we?" she said, her tone deceptively calm. Karen's smile faltered just slightly. This wasn't the fiery retaliation she had expected. This was something colder, sharper, piece by piece. Judy began dismantling Karen's so-called evidence. The receipts Karen had waved around so proudly were outdated and irrelevant. The photographs she claimed proved her story were grainy, unconvincing, and contradicted by her own timeline. The expert advice she quoted turned out to be nothing more than blog posts, pulled from questionable corners of the internet with each revelation. Judy didn't merely poke holes in Karen's story, she shredded it completely, until it resembled nothing more than confetti scattered across the courtroom floor. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her earlier bravado cracking as she tried to interject. Judy raised a single finger, silencing her instantly. "You've spoken enough, Ms. Mitchell," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Now it's my turn." The authority in her voice carried such weight that even Karen's arrogance couldn't push against it. For the first time that day, Karen leaned back, suddenly aware that the ground beneath her was collapsing. Judy paused, letting the tension build once more, letting the audience hang on every word. Then she delivered the line that froze the entire room. "You call me a useless grandma. Let me remind you I've forgotten more about the law than you'll ever learn in your entire lifetime." The words landed like a gavel strike. The audience gasped again. The plaintiff's lips curled into a quiet smile, and even the bailiff allowed the faintest flicker of approval to cross his usually stoic face. Karen's smirk vanished completely, replaced by a twitch of panic she couldn't hide. Judy wasn't finished. She continued her dismantling with calm ferocity, stacking Karen's lies and arrogance into a mountain so high it crushed her own credibility. As she spoke, it became clear that Judy hadn't just been waiting to respond. She had been setting the trap all along. Karen thought she was running the show, but Judy had been in control from the very first moment. The moment had finally arrived. Karen's smugness crumbled, replaced by nervous fidgeting that betrayed the storm unraveling inside her. She had expected Judge Judy to explode in anger, to yell or shout. Instead, Judy chose a different weapon: precision. And now it was time for the finishing blow. Judy leaned forward, her gaze unflinching. "Yes, I am a grandmother," she began, her voice steady, almost deceptively gentle. "And that means I've lived long enough to see more liars, cheats, and fools than you could possibly imagine. Every time I sit in this chair, I meet another one. And today, Ms. Mitchell, you've volunteered to be an example." The words struck Karen harder than any shouted insult ever could. Her face flushed crimson, her jaw quivered, and her eyes darted desperately toward the audience as if searching for support, but there was none. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom was locked on Judy, captivated by the authority radiating from her words. Judy's tone sharpened. "You call me a useless grandma. Let me educate you. I've presided over more than 20,000 cases. I've shaped rulings that law students still study. I've stood face to face with criminals, con artists, and manipulators who thought they were untouchable, and not a single one of them walked out of here thinking they were bigger than the law. Do you really think you, with your attitude and your handbag claims, are going to be the first? The audience erupted in murmurs. The plaintiff's eyes gleamed with vindication. Even the bailiff, ever composed, allowed himself the faintest nod of agreement. Karen's bravado was gone, replaced by trembling hands gripping the desk in front of her. She had come in swinging, but now she was pinned against the ropes with no escape. Judy wasn't finished. She pressed harder, every sentence tightening the noose around Karen's arrogance. Respect is not optional in my courtroom. It is not something you can sneer at, roll your eyes over, or dismiss as unimportant. Respect is the foundation of justice, and today, you've shown this court and the world that you have none. Karen's lips trembled as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Her voice, once loud and mocking, had abandoned her completely. The audience leaned in closer, knowing they were witnessing history. Knowing this was the kind of moment that would be clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times. Then came the final strike, the comeback that would etch itself into television legend. The difference between you and me, Ms. Mitchell, is simple, Judy said. You think my age makes me useless? I know your arrogance makes you powerless. And when arrogance and wisdom collide, arrogance always loses. The silence that followed was deafening, not because the audience didn't know how to react, but because they were stunned into stillness. It was the kind of silence that comes only when a single sentence demolishes an entire persona. Karen sat frozen, her face pale, her eyes glassy. She had walked in believing she could humiliate Judge Judy, but instead she had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The plaintiff allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, while the stenographer shook her head in disbelief, her fingers barely keeping up with Judy's relentless pace. Karen shifted again in her seat, but there was no recovery. She was finished, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, the faintest trace of a victorious smile flickering across her face. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her words had done the work. Karen had tried to belittle her, and in doing so, had set herself up for the kind of public destruction that would haunt her forever. And if you think Judge Judy's comeback was one of the most devastating clapbacks ever delivered in a courtroom, comment below with the words, "Respect the court," because what just happened wasn't justice, it was history. The courtroom, still heavy with silence after Judy's brutal comeback, turned its collective gaze back to Karen. The woman who had strutted in with the confidence of a queen was suddenly unraveling in front of everyone's eyes. Her cheeks flushed, her lips quivered, and her hands, once so expressive in their dismissive waves, trembled against the desk. The smirk she had clung to like armor was gone. Melted into a mask of panic, Karen tried to speak, but her voice cracked, thin and desperate. "Your Honor, I didn't mean it like that. I was just passionate," she stammered, each word landing flat, devoid of the sharp edge she had wielded earlier. The courtroom wasn't buying it, and neither was Judy. "Passion," Judy said, her voice slicing through the air like a knife. "You confuse passion with arrogance. You confuse respect with weakness. And now you want to rewrite history in the middle of my courtroom." Judy leaned forward, her eyes burning with authority. "No, Ms. Mitchell, the record is clear. You called me useless. You mocked this court, and now you'll live with the consequences." Karen's eyes filled with tears. They started as small glimmers, but within seconds they streamed down her face, smearing her makeup into dark streaks. The audience shifted against them in stunned silence, others whispering about the historic humiliation unfolding before them. The plaintiff, who had endured Karen's arrogance outside the courtroom for months, sat straighter in her chair, her confidence restored by the sight of justice being served. "I didn't mean it," Karen whispered again. her voice nearly drowned out by her own sobs. She looked around the room for sympathy, but there was none. Even her friend, who had accompanied her for support, kept her eyes glued to her phone, desperate to disassociate from the disaster unfolding before them. The bailiff inched closer, not because Karen was dangerous, but because her sobbing had grown so intense it seemed she might collapse under the weight of her humiliation. Judy, unmoved, delivered the final sting. Respect isn't something you discover when it's convenient. Respect is the bare minimum this court requires. And today, you proved you don't even have that. The sobs grew louder. Karen's shoulders shook as the reality of her situation came crashing down. She wasn't just losing a case. She wasn't just facing financial penalties. She was losing the carefully crafted image of superiority, untouchable confidence, and illusion of power she had built for herself. All of it had shattered in front of millions of viewers who would never forget her face or her words. For once, the cameras weren't her allies. They weren't capturing her victory speech or her smug smiles. They were capturing her downfall. Frame by frame, turning her arrogance into the stuff of viral legend. The same audience she had dismissed was now witnessing her total collapse, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Karen had wanted the spotlight. She had it now, but not in the way she ever imagined. Instead of glory, the light revealed her for what she truly was: entitled, arrogant, and ultimately powerless against the authority she had tried so hard to mock. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, sealing Karen's fate. Judge Judy's ruling was swift and merciless. Not only did Karen lose her case, but she was ordered to cover additional court costs as a consequence of her disrespect. The plaintiff exhaled in relief, tears welling up not of humiliation like Karen's, but of vindication. Justice had finally spoken loud and clear. Karen, meanwhile, was left trembling in her seat, her sobs echoing through the room as the bailiff signaled for her to be escorted out. Her once perfect appearance had been reduced to a spectacle, mascara streaking her cheeks, lipstick smeared, and carefully styled hair undone by nervous hands. She had walked into the courtroom expecting to play the conqueror, but she was leaving as the conquered, forever marked by the words she had thoughtlessly thrown at the wrong person. The audience filed out slowly, whispering in disbelief. Some shook their heads at Karen's arrogance. Others chuckled quietly at her downfall. And many would later recount the moment as the most shocking clapback they had ever seen on television. Even those who had attended countless tapings knew this one was special. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a reckoning. By the time the episode aired, the clip had already begun circulating online, spreading like wildfire across social media. Headlines blared, "Woman calls Judge Judy useless grandma, instantly regrets it." Memes flooded the internet and comments poured in from viewers around the world. "This is why you don't mess with Judge Judy," one post read. "Age isn't weakness, it's wisdom," said another. Karen had dreamed of being remembered, but not like this. Instead of a victory, she had become a cautionary tale. Judge Judy, sitting at her bench, delivered the closing words with the same unflinching authority she had displayed throughout. Arrogance may shout loudly, but respect always speaks louder. The words lingered in the air long after the cameras stopped rolling. And so the story ended not with Karen's triumph, but with her humiliation serving as a reminder to millions. In Judy's courtroom, arrogance is stripped bare. Lies are dismantled, and respect is non-negotiable. Arrogance may dazzle for a moment, but respect is what endures. When pride collides with wisdom, pride will always shatter. As Karen learned, too late, you never call Judge Judy useless, because she will show you, in front of the world, just how powerful wisdom truly is. If you believe arrogance always deserves accountability, hit subscribe and share this story, because sometimes the greatest lessons come from the sharpest truths.